Conversations with Svend, offering expert insight and guidance on topics like relating, sex, money, and the benefits of nature for well-being. Conversations with Svend. Welcome back, Jem. It's been an exciting couple of weeks since we spoke last, and I'm really happy that you were willing to accept my invite and come back so we can talk about, I can share more about my own experience of being at your events and working with you in the embodied form. I really had a brilliant time, and I'd like to share some of my experiences. Last time it was quite a tour de force of a free-flowing conversation where you spoke about the energy of harnessing orgasmic potential and having that flowing in your life in all areas. And you also explained and you told about your incredible journey of recovering from cancer using full body orgasmic energies, other protocols, health protocols, and then we went into speaking about all the like what is sexualogical body work, all the other people working in your field, all the things you're doing, like the Empowered Women's Book Club, Couples Book Club, the offerings you have for men online.
We covered a lot.
We covered a lot. We went into what it means to be trauma informed, etc., etc. It was quite something, and I felt really happy after. I just felt I'm on track. It's like something that's important for me. This will provide a lot of value for other people. Yeah, so
Well, I've had a full-on couple of weeks since we talked. So I've ran my full body orgasm day retreat, which was just a day. And we had about 25 people harnessing and learning about moving sexual energy through their body in just a handful of hours, really. And then the following weekend, I ran the retreat. So that's a whole weekend, which just allows it to be more held, to go deeper, to create more of a community. And that's really where I see people feel bigger shifts in their life. And the feedback I get from people have got this week was things like, I just feel more like myself, or I feel like I've come home, or I feel like everything's a little bit easier or brighter or more pleasurable, or people noticing that they've dropped old beliefs and conditionings that weren't helpful for them around pleasure. So even though, you know, it's kind of marketed as the full body orgasm retreat, and we definitely learn techniques and steps in that direction, and it's a practice. So even if it doesn't necessarily happen that weekend in the way that we think it should, it's something that can build over time from that place. But what often happens first is that people learn what gets in the way to their accessing the greatest amount of pleasure they can. And that's when things in their wider life start to drop away, because they're not operating anymore from that place of, I don't know, fear or lack of contraction and shame around pleasure. So all the stuff that we've built up that's in the way just lets go. So that's what I'm hearing from most of the people that went, is that actually they're stepping into something quite new, and the stuff that wasn't helpful anymore in their lives is dissolving. And maybe that's old relationships, old friendships, old belief. You know, people are leaving jobs, all sorts. And that's what I love about my work. And I know it's like sexological body work and the focus is on sex, but it's so much bigger. It's so much bigger than that for me.
Yeah, I mean, it does happen to me, but I find myself kind of lost for words. It does happen. It's like can't really articulate in words everything that I feel I've experienced. I would like to, and I think that's also general kind of because it's intangible, isn't it, on some level? Um,
People often say that. It's like, I can't quite put my finger on it. I haven't really got words for it, but something's changed and it feels big, you know.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's definitely about kind of shifting focus and kind of I feel that I notice. I mean, so yeah, I'd like to share a little bit about my experience. So
I'd
that
love to hear, Sven, how that was
mm,
for you and what's come
mm,
out of this.
yeah. Well, I mean, so there's so many good things to say, and I only got good things to say, and it's held in a beautiful space in Derbyshire, in a beautiful kind of stately home with gardens, and it has a whole atmosphere in its own. You have this wonderful. I was very impressed by yourself, and then the team you have with you. You have two people, so there's three people, and I think there were about 17 altogether. I think we were. So those numbers felt very balanced, and then I mean, the food we could now we had the last we had the last we could talk like we could talk for days for like the last each topic we could talk a long time about the food. It was really wonderful.
Pleasure in abundance in
Pleasure.
all aspects, please.
Yeah. And there was just a lot of joy. There was just a lot of this dancing. And so we got breath, we got sound, and we got movement. Those are key ingredients in your work. Um, I felt there was this kind of in all the structures, it was very related to what you spoke about, the trauma-informed body work, etc. In all the kind of structures or processes that was there, I felt about specifically like 10 to 15% out of my comfort zone. you know, which felt very manageable for my nervous system. It felt I can kind of bring myself back. And at the end of the weekend, I did feel like a real kind of sense of accomplishment and being grounded and being very joyful. And I had consolidated my kind of, I had a friend I could visit going up, and I had booked an Airbnb, and I could take it like I didn't have too much on my schedule the next couple of days. So all in all, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I would warmly recommend, and I have also taken action in the sense that I've reserved a space for next year, which I believe is the 18th to 20th of April. How many spaces are left, if anybody was curious and wanted to?
It's still over 6 months away, isn't it? And it's half full already. So I think we've got 5 spaces left or 6 spaces left, something like that. So we've got
Right,
one in April 2025 and we've got one in September 2025.
right. Yeah, no, I'm definitely all in, Jem. It's very good. It's good work. It's good work.
I'm loving that you looked after yourself in the plan of the day after, having somewhere safe to integrate and loads of space around it. So you didn't rush back into anything too hectic, which is where we can shrink and contract after such a weekend of being expanded and learning something new and being in a loving and generous space with loving and generous people, So well done for that, because I think that helps us embody the learnings instead of just almost brush them off to get back into real life.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I've,
I'm
yeah,
loving hearing that you were 10% to 15% out of your comfort zone at times. Because like we've got the comfort zone, but then just outside the comfort zone is our learning zone. And we want to be able to grow, is to just nudge ourselves as safely as possible outside of our comfort zone. Then we can always come back in to the safety of the comfort zone, because we've got the comfort zone, the learning zone, and just outside of that, there's the terror zone. And that's where we don't want to hit. We don't want to shove ourselves into that experience, which it just feels too much. We don't have the capacity, and there's overwhelm that can hit our system. And of course, everyone has different levels of comfort zone and learning zones. So it's just navigating how that is and giving permission for everyone in the room to kind of work at their own organic pace so that we can support that. Because some people might be able to go a bit further and expand a bit more, and others less so. And that's really okay. Because actually, there's nothing valuable in hitting the terror zone and throwing ourselves in 100%. So actually, 10%, 15% out of the comfort zone, that sounds like learning. That's enough, you know.
Yeah, that's very healthy and wholesome. I feel personally that I gentle is where it's at. Easy is right. Easy does it. And I personally have gone on a lot of these kind of, it's very cathartic. Everything is like, it's a massive expansion, which should ends up in a collapse because it's totally unsustainable for the nervous system to make this kind of massive expansion in such a short time. And I think I sense a lot of your work is also, like we were talking about, how it's reclaiming pleasure in the body, it's reclaiming bodily autonomy, etc. And it's also about letting go of all these very unrealistic expectations. There is no getting rich quick. I mean, there might be, but it's not sustainable. It's like we have to do some grounded, embodied work and we don't really have to get anywhere. That's another thing. So we have to stop this idea of we getting somewhere. We have to notice what's here, I feel.
I think we often seem to value the very big, intense experiences. We're a little bit addicted to that high level intensity because that's the world we live in. Actually, everything's hard and fast and coming in at quite a rate, and it's getting faster. And I've also definitely been in the school of thought where, more is more, bigger releases and experiences and screaming and crying and shaking and da. And the intensity obviously means more healing, but I'm not so sure of that anymore. That maybe it had its place in my journey, that's for sure. But now I'm like, oh, I can actually take the foot off the pedal and learn in a way that feels really far more easeful and growthful, where I don't have to do so much processing and unpacking and self-care afterwards. These titrated ways of learning instead of the big smash it against the wall kind of intensity that comes.
Yeah. Well, I feel that there's this kind of these neural pathways and, it's just that gentle continuing kind of, and I felt like, so for me, it's very exciting to kind of have an energy around the energetic body. And maybe we can, because it was so visceral, it was so strong, and that is very tangible, and it's fascinating work, Jem. It's really,
and it's different for everyone. So I can sit in the room and explain to the group what full body orgasmic experience looks and feels like to me, and what my experience of energy looks like to me. But every day it's different, actually, And so the difference between full body orgasmic experience and orgasm is that orgasm often, not always, but fits into a nice neat box, or we have an idea of what orgasm should look and feel and be like. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what we're trying to do is kind of deconstruct that a bit and go, okay, what are the other options? If we're not trying to fit our pleasure into this tiny little box here, what are the other options? So for some people, lots of people maybe identified with what happened to them as full body orgasmic experience. Some of them less so, but they still know that they had some pleasure in their body that was new and interesting. So, okay, if it's new and it's interesting and we've learned something, that's good enough for me. Because I know when I first started learning about full body orgasm experience in my own body, it was really easy to ignore because it wasn't like this idea of what I'd previously had of what orgasm should be like in my body. So whilst this subtle thing was happening energetically in the background, I was still seeking the intensity of the peak orgasm or the average orgasm, if you like. So I could ignore that little thing, that little twitch, that little fuzz, that little buzz, whatever was going on, you know, somewhere else in my body that wasn't even necessarily my genitals. So when we switch our focus into, oh, what is happening in my body? Instead of, why am I not there yet? Why am I not feeling that thing that I think I should be feeling? We can let go of that, take a breath and go, okay, where is the pleasure in my body? And it might not be in our sex, in our genitals. It might not be where we expect it to be, in the traditional erogenous zones. It might be, okay, there's some warmth actually around my belly and my chest, or maybe there's some tingling in my hands, or maybe my spine wants to flex. So when we step away of the conditioning of what we should look like in pleasure, what else can happen, you know? And sometimes we might look or feel a bit weird when we're in our fullest sexual expression, because we've been told that to be in pleasure, you need to look, feel, and act a certain way. So it's all about reclaiming, what's my body in pleasure look like today, which might be different to tomorrow or last week. So it's ever evolving. Pleasure in our body is ever evolving.
Yeah, yeah. I love this aspect of you have this kind of pre-framing and reaching these kind of agreements and clarity on boundaries, etc., etc. And you got this, you can downgrade, but you can't upgrade. And
Yeah.
and also what I feel is very empowering is that kind of, it is really coming back to self and owning our experience and owning our own pleasure. And it reminded me, like, it was Anthony Robbins, I believe, he said those who become masters are those who are willing to practice fundamentals over and over. And I love the way you kind of like, because I think a lot, many times it's like making it up as you go along. And you're saying no, absolutely not making it up as you go along. It's like very strict, very bounded. And I love the fact that you have these other people in your team who are equally brilliant to yourself. I love the teamwork, and everybody's there holding the space. It's not like, because I have been in workshops where everybody's kind of involved, and I'm thinking, who's actually holding this? Like, it's like, and it's like, so I really appreciate that kind of very grounded, and it feels like that regulation of nervous system co-regulation is kind of, it's taken into account, isn't it? It's part of
Yeah.
the, yeah. Ooh.
The team I've been working with, Finn and Claire, my two assistants, they're far more than assistants. They're not just willing volunteers. They both have their absolute solid grounded experience in this work. So they have wisdom to bring. And I'm so grateful that they choose to keep turning up with me for the groups. We've been running this work together now for 4 retreats. So that's 2 years. I've been working with Claire longer though, but as a 3, it feels really rich, and because we're really solid in how we work together, it allows the group to really go solid. And when we're holding space, it's really important that one of us is always holding space, and the other two maybe dipping in and dipping out and dipping in and dipping out. So, in when they're needed, but not, mother in, and more like in when they're needed, dropping the golden nuggets, supporting when needed, and stepping back and holding the whole. And I feel so blessed, and I think that's part of the reason that the group can go so deeply, is they feel our depth and connection and our embodied practice of the work. It's not just some volunteers I've pulled in from left, right, and center. They are solid teachers in their own right. So yeah, blessed with a great team. Even down to the caterer we have, he's done plenty of this sexuality work. So it's important to me that all of the team, he's kind of holding the wider space at lunchtime and in the kitchen. He's also has an awareness of the sensitivity needed around this work and holding space for the vulnerability. Because even in tea breaks, we might be a bit like, oh gosh, what's just gone on there? I'm feeling a lot. And he just turns up with absolute joy and holding. you know, and I think that's really important for me. And that's part of creating an environment which is as safe as possible. And we can't create safety for everyone, but just noticing what is important for people to allow to drop into their vulnerability.
Yes, yes. Yeah, when we were speaking about safety, this aspect that safety really comes from our own body, and you can create a space that is holding that, but it really has to come um, from your own, like if I'm in fight and flight, everything I see will be dangerous and
Yeah.
triggering, and and yeah, and I was very impressed, Jem, and I think there is that. It was also very joyous, and I think when I watched the conversation we had last, and it's also, I think, the micro joy of having a cup of tea and feeling the heat and having a ceremonious experience of sitting down and pausing and drinking the tea. And it's like, I think, like I'm quite familiar with your work in the sense I follow you, and like it's not all this kind of huge kind of, it's also that little, feeling the wind, feeling the sun against your skin. It's like, I think maybe if somebody is listening and they're really like in overwhelm of life, then what are like small kind of sustainable actions that
Oh,
that they can take that,
thank you for asking. So, so the full body orgasm work is the one that gets the most publicity because it's big, isn't it? It's exciting, it's sexy. It's the thing I've been on telly for, And whereas actually that's not all I do. And that might be the big, sexy, exciting, weird, taboo stuff. But actually, to get us there, we need to have a base level of low level pleasures in our lives. We can't ignore those tiny experiences of making sure I'm comfortable in the chair that I'm sat in, making sure I'm comfortable with the conversations that I have or the people I'm connected with. A big story or a big kind of idea of mine at the moment. Well, there's two ideas. One I've been working with for a few years, and a question I often ask clients is, how can I be in 10% more pleasure right now? And for me, even pleasure's often a big word for people. Maybe it's about 10% more comfort. So do I need to shift in my chair? Do I need a cushion on my lap? Do I need to remove a layer? Do I need a blanket? And I noticed this in supermarket queues. I'd stand and I'd get grumpy because I'm in a supermarket queue, and I'd be leaning on one hip, and have a heavy bag, and I'd just put myself in micro stresses throughout the day. And it's like, okay, what can I change to make this 10% more pleasurable? It's like, actually, I'm going to stand so I'm on both feet. I'm going to like put this bag down or readjust. I'm just going to breathe a bit deeper and allow my mouth to smile a bit more and soften my forehead, or I'm going to hold my belly or something, or I'm going to listen to music that shifts my mood. So just noticing all of those times in life, we're just in our little bit of anxiousness, suffering, grumpiness. It's like, okay, do I need to be in this? Does this serve me right now? What can help me shift this mood? And so at the retreats, we often use a lot of joy, a lot of laughter, a lot of dancing. And because ultimately, we take the idea of pleasure as very serious, this pleasure thing. We're doing work. We're doing hard work in sacred sexuality. And we are doing hard work, and it can be hilarious and fun and maybe a bit ridiculous. We can laugh at ourselves as we breathe and sound. And sometimes we're making ridiculous sound from our bodies, and our bodies are doing really strange things outside of what you would see in us, let's say, pornography sex, And it actually just being like, oh, this is a fun thing to be doing. And it might make me feel a bit ridiculous. And that's okay as well. So all of these little, noticing the micro stresses we put ourselves in during the day, and how can we change them? So if we're about to go into a business phone call or a challenging phone call with our mum or something, so okay, I know I've got to have this grumpy phone call, and instead of getting myself built up, I put on some music and I'll dance around the kitchen for 5 minutes, so that I already step into the conversation with this slight lightness. And it changes how I show up, and it changes what I say. It changes how I receive the information coming in, you know. So let's not just wait till we've got a challenge to put ourselves in that position. Now, this was a lot of my work around cancer, actually, was I had lots of appointments with doctors, oncologists, dermatologists, different specialists, different scans all the time, going in for treatment, all of these potentially quite stressful situations. And I just make sure that I'd supercharge myself beforehand, listening to music, dancing, making sure I was, you know, drinking tea I really enjoyed, eating things that really nourished me, wearing clothes that really nourished me. So how can I be in my most comfort right now, my most pleasure right now, and my most nourished right now? Those are some good questions to have.
Yeah, you work in reclamation of everything, basically pleasure, joy, and everything. Also, like whatever comes up, isn't it? You know, it may not be
It's all
all.
linked. We can't just say we only want more pleasure in our lives and ignore all the, you know, shitty stuff that goes on. It's there too. So let's be with that and see if we can nourish ourselves through those times as well and make ourselves more comfortable when we are in challenges.
Yeah, allowing it all, allowing, accepting, and embracing it all, and it's very inspirational. Feel definitely in cultures like there is this kind of goal orientation, and there's this kind of, you know, work hard, and and I've coined this phrase once, like I take having fun very seriously. And I think there's this, it is gravity and levity. It is like, you know, we may be a hot mess of sobbing, and it's all okay. There's no right or wrong. It's about being in with what it is. Um,
So
let's Yeah, go
my
on.
my friend and kind of fellow teacher, Jamie Cattell, and a lot of other teachers kind of have similar. He wrote something recently online and it said, if you're taking your spiritual practice seriously, you might be doing it wrong. And I quite like that, you know. So how can we have lightness with all of our learning and growth and healing? So yeah, healing through pleasure. That's my bag, really.
Yes, very wonderful, Jem. Absolutely wonderful. Let us speak about this, because it is exciting being on television, isn't it? And you have shown up in my life. Feel like you very tragically lost your mother, and you were deep in that journey of grief. And I remember you. This is also how I know you. You reached out, and we had a little uh, ceremony online where we remembering our parents that had gone to the other side, and we had a little sharing circle and a ritual, and then at that time you also had a breakup of a romantic partnership, so you kind of hit with this double whammy of grief and heartache, and then you were contacted by Channel 4 and they wanted to appear what became Sexuality. And how was that journey for you? How do you prepare for something like that?
Well, I was deep in grief, eyebrow deep in grief, unable to see the light really. When yeah, I remember that email dropping in, and I remember the first phone call I had with them, which was, what now? Now you want to put me on telly now? And I remember them saying, well, we're not going to do any filming for at least 6 months. And there was just something in me that went, just say yes now, just say yes to now. And you might change your mind in 6 months, but just say yes now. And I just trusted that. So I said yes. And then I sat back and I went, wow, one, you're absolutely not in the best shape you've ever been in your life. And two, you're about to put yourself in an even more potentially vulnerable position, because they did want the full body orgasmic work, which does look bonkers, can look really quite bizarre from the outside. So it's like, wow, I'm putting myself out there on this platform, a very public, very mainstream platform, Channel 4, to be judged, to have my work judged. And it's not just my work, it's my calling, it's my belief, it's something that is really intrinsic to me and my life. You know, I live it. And it's like, wow, so you're already in a vulnerable state and you're about to expose this even more. And that was a really big process for me to go through. It's like, what if I'm shamed? What if I'm burnt at the stake? What if I'm torn apart and ridiculed? What if they make me look awful or like a fraud or like a crazy spiritual sexy con person on telly? And I remembered when I was young watching this program in the early 90s. Oh, and I was definitely too young to watch it, but it was kind of I had a glimpse of it. And it was called Eurotrash. And they would visit sexy spaces, sexuality practitioners, nudist spaces, you know, stuff that's kind of taboo. And they take the mickey out of it and they'd dub words over the top of it. And they made it look ridiculous, absolutely made it look ridiculous. But even as a kid, I remember seeing something in that sparked an interest in me when I was 12, 13, 14, that made me have an interest in this. So I just kind of got over myself and went, okay, if this work, even if I'm torn to shreds, this work is going to help someone see it. And I need to get out of my way and just be in service. And also I thought, how am I going to get 15 people to turn up and be filmed in their full body orgasmic process? You know, what if loads of people sign up to it and then just don't turn up? Just me and 3 people in a room with a camera. I mean, you know, there could have been lots of awkwardness, but actually what really happened was the community showed up, they turned up, they were in service, they knew that this was a bigger thing than them. And some people turned up who had some experience, which is helpful because that kind of carries the group a bit. And some people turned up who had never worked with me before and had never done any of this work. How incredibly brave. So, I'm so grateful to those generous people. And actually, you know, there was a little bit of Mickey taking, as is the British humour, and it works for mainstream people to make this work kind of accessible. But ultimately, I think they did a pretty good job. And there's still a video of it on YouTube, and the YouTube comments are people like, oh, tearing it apart a bit. But, you know, there's also the part we go, yeah, this is a bit weird, isn't it? And it's okay. It's okay that it's outside of the norm. And maybe it's not going to be for everyone. But I know for the people that it resonates with, it really resonates with. And so many people came to me and said, I saw you on Channel 4 and I'm interested in your work. And even if they're not directly interested in me and my work, it helps them know that this work is out there, and hopefully they do a bit of research to find other teachers in the community that they do resonate more with, so that they can get the information and the education or the support that they need, even if it's not from me. So it felt like a bigger thing than me. But yeah, it was quite a ride.
Oh, I think
And
you
then
did.
it
Yeah,
and
go
then
on.
it happened again a year later. Another Channel 5 production team got in touch with me. I was like, really? I mean, I think I pulled it off the first time around. Maybe I struck lucky. This is the time that I trip up. And again, another 15 volunteers turned up to be filmed. And it was a very similar documentary, but incredibly well filmed. Actually, I prefer the Channel 5 one personally. And it was beautiful and it worked for people. Lovely. Can't ask for any more.
I think you did very well, and both clips are available on your website, jemayres.co.uk, and you can find them. How did you prepare for this to sit there and tell how to have a full body orgasm on television? I mean,
Well, I'd been doing it for quite a long time anyway. I'd already given talks about it and I'd already run lots and lots of workshops. So it wasn't so much that aspect, but it was looking at, okay, what do I teach and how do I make it accessible? And what's the important information that I need to get across? So that preferably when they edit it down, the important bits get out there. So I was very clear with them that actually I wanted to know what they were putting out there, so that it wasn't completely skewed about. So there was quite a lot of conversations about that, because I wanted to give people a relevant and an actual experience of the teachings, instead of just the fantasy bits that look weird and magical. I wanted to get the reality in there as well, so that people at home could get some use from it and it didn't look completely inaccessible. But it was more about just making sure that I was in a really centered, grounded place. And I think with the first filming, because I was still very much in my grief when that was happening, the grief kind of helped me, because I was really clear. It was almost like anything smaller than kind of sex, death, or trauma, it was water off the duck's back. So I was really in this place of clarity around the bigger issues, you know. So I didn't let any little niggles get in the way. So I could really turn up. It was actually the second time round I was a lot more nervous about the filming, funnily enough. It's like, I've already done it once. Why am I so terrified this time round? Probably because I did so well the first time. I was like, oh, this is the point you're going to drop off the pedestal. Am I being too greedy here? Do I need to say no to this opportunity and just thank my lucky stars that, you know, documentary one seemed to pull off? I suppose it's just, coming back to the self, coming back to the breath, and getting over all of the little ego voices that tell me I'm not enough, and trusting that whatever ends up going out into the world will be useful to someone.
How well do you think that what came out represents the work you're doing? I'm just going a little bit deeper because I'm curious myself.
Thank you. So hours and hours and hours and hours of filming was cut down to, 12 minutes or something. And I do, things like I spoke about so much. And of course, the bit they kept in was me talking about ankle-gasms, which I get, it's funny and it's interesting, but I think they did get enough of the fundamental information. And they did actually come back to me as the production company said, okay, so the more that we are learning from the different practitioners that they were interviewing, I believe, 3 different practitioners each documentary. They said the more we're learning, the more we're noticing that it's really important that we cover trauma. And they said, we'd like to come back to you to interview you about this, because I'm really clear in how I speak about it. And I think that was really valuable that they acknowledged that, when you're working with sexuality and when you're working with your own sexuality, trauma needs to be part of the conversation. And how do we work with that? So from capital T trauma, where people who have experienced abuse and assault, etc., to actually just the trauma of living in a society when you're not given permission to be your fullest sexual expression. We were all told as children, stop touching yourself, stop flashing your knickers at the boys, don't talk about sex, all of these different things. They're all like micro shutdowns for us. And we very quickly learn that sex isn't safe. Talking about sex, expressing sexuality, touching ourselves, all of these things aren't safe and aren't acceptable. And we'll get told off or shamed or shunned by society, community, our family. And that hits a survival instinct in us. So actually not being sexual beings is what keeps us safe on one fundamental level. So I'm really enjoying the fact that they asked me to do an interview about trauma and the effect that that has on sexuality and how it can be stored in the body. So how these young experiences of shaming and guilt and conditioning have an effect on our adult sexual selves, and how we can, work with the body to work with that and to release that. And ultimately, that's part of the full body orgasm work that I offer. It's not actually about do this and you will become orgasmic. It's a lot more on, okay, let's look at what gets in the way of our fullest sexual expression and find ways that we can just acknowledge that before we move forward into pleasure.
Yeah. Well, getting this work into the mainstream, and it's always going to be challenging, is because there is a certain view on, and I think, I think just, well done, Jem. I mean, this is like, uh,
I don't ever look at the comments on the YouTube clips, Sven. So, I think
no,
I looked one day and went, okay, that's enough. I don't need to read anymore about what a crackpot people think I am. And that's okay. Their ideas are valuable. That's fine for them. But yeah, I know it
yeah.
also works for others. That's good enough for me.
I think it's powerful, and I think it's necessary to kind of, again, you're bringing something back to something that's completely natural, like original innocence is more natural than original sin. And you're bringing it back to, we have these incredible bodies, You can't really, you can have a supercomputer and this and that, but there's nothing that really matches, the incredible human body, and we have this pleasure potential.
Yeah.
So why are we not allowed to enjoy and, the full spectrum of whatever it is we are here to. So I think it's just really wonderful. And
I know
yeah.
that my relationship to my own body is massively different to before I started this work 13, 15 years ago. So in my 20s, I might have looked on the outside super sexually empowered. I was slim, I was young, I was attractive, I was teaching burlesque. So actually I was kind of like the pinnacle of everything sexual, but I wasn't feeling anything in my body. I was having numbness. My orgasms were stifled at best. My sexual connection with others wasn't really working. I wasn't enjoying my body for me. And so now, and I thought that all of the things that my body is capable of achieving now and can do regularly just through myself and just through my breath and just through my awareness, what they were massively outside of my awareness. And I never even dreamed that they were accessible or possible. And the only thing that it's this body work that has changed that for me. I've gone from numbness and lack of awareness to a process of losing all of that conditioning that gets in the way, educating myself and releasing trauma and fear from the body to get to an educated place where I can, give my body the permission it needs and the environment it needs to be in its fullest sexual expression. And that's probably one of the things that I'm the most passionate about, is speaking to people who are in that place where sexual shutdown or numbness or trauma makes them believe that they're never going to have a good sex life, or they're never going to be able to orgasm, or they're never going to enjoy their body, and say to them, it's not that far away. It is not that far away. I did years of therapy before I did body work, and it's the body work that shifted it for me.
Mhm. I think it's relevant to speak about what's the connection, Jem, between this harnessing these full body orgasmic energies and manifestation, womb manifestation, creating in the world. How do you, how do they correspond?
Thank you for asking. When I first started this work, it wasn't my sexual pleasure that changed overnight. Other things changed for me. And I kept turning up at these Tantra workshops thinking, well, I haven't had more pleasure, but I have built a new business, or I've built a better relationship with my body, or I've got enough self-love to be able to leave relationships that no longer work for me, or I'm attracting different people who value me more into the world. And all of that changed before my sex life. And it's almost like what it gave me was a solid belief in myself and my system around self-love, self-esteem, valuing myself more. And maybe that's not everyone's way in, but that's what I needed to learn before I could get into anything near orgasmic potential. But for me, when we start to actually embrace our bodies more, we're unlearning all of that stuff that we learn in our younger years, which tells us our body and our pleasure is wrong. And if our body and our pleasure is wrong, that's a massive part of who we are. So we're living lives with a part of us that isn't okay. There's a part of us, our sexuality, our body, our pleasure that isn't okay, isn't acceptable. Don't bring it up in polite conversation. No one talks about sex, do they? Unless it's in a titillating way. No one has the normalized conversations. When I was first going through my sexual shutdown and my sexual trauma, even the doctors and the therapists I went to couldn't really look me in the eye when we were talking about sex. And it's like that creates this experience and this culture of shame around our bodies. So basically, there's a part of us that isn't allowed to show up. So we've got to cut off part of ourselves. That means that we can't be a fully authentic person. I can't show up in my fullest because a part of me is dirty or bad or not welcome or going to be shamed. And that's the bit that's going to get me cut out of community or, shamed away from the family. So first of all, for me, it was learning that my sexual expression, or just not even my sexual expression, my body, and prioritizing my pleasure, and these could be really low level pleasures, are valuable and a part of me, and all of me is worthy of love and acceptance, which meant that I started having to put down boundaries. So instead of prioritizing other people's comfort and other people's pleasure whilst putting myself in suffering or overgiving or people pleasing or making my needs really, really small to make sure other people were happy, I had to put in boundaries to make sure I was prioritizing myself and I was looking after people in a way that was also healthy for me. It's not a purely selfish experience, because the more I look after me, the more generous I am and able to give. It's a bit like this work. I really have to look after myself to be able to give this work, And I think everyone, regardless of what we do in life, we've got so many different directions that we're pulled in and so many different commitments. And if we're giving from an empty cup, what that breeds is exhaustion, burnout, resentment. We're not going to come from a happy place. Whereas me, I know that I want to really nourish myself so that I can step into experience in my fullest and have a hell yes instead of a, oh, right, I can do that. I don't know if that answered the question, Svend, but we got somewhere.
Well, we are this conversation is a little bit different from what we had last time. We're just like everything is like I think that time I was very kind of neurodiverse driven to pack it full of information, and this time I feel just the joy of having a conversation is also um, let's speak more about boundaries, Jem, and practicing what you do, and tell us something. There's obvious, but tell us about the obvious boundaries, and tell us about the more subtle boundaries that you, in order to thrive in the kind of practice that you do.
Thank you. So something I talk to my clients about is recognizing what a boundary is. And some people might have, I'm okay to have my leg touched, but I'm not okay to have, my breasts touched, for example. And it's like, okay, so we put a boundary down, no breasts touch. But also let's look at your leg. If we say we're all right to have our leg touched, where on the leg? And they're like, well, yeah, up at the top of the leg is all right. And I'm like, okay, if up at the top of the leg is all right, do we have to touch up against that boundary, or do we stay a few inches below? How does that feel in our body? Because we don't just have a nervous system response when we're up against a boundary. We have a nervous system response as the hand starts to glide towards the boundary. Something in the background in the body is going, hand's getting a bit near the boundary. Whereas actually, if I stay around the knee, maybe there's no response there. That's a charge. And I'm talking about the physical boundaries here because I think this is important to talk about, especially with clients. But also, what are our time boundaries? What do I have the capacity for when we step into conversations or when we step into practices with another people? Or if someone asks us something, hey, do you want a cup of tea? Or can we have a phone call? It might be, Yeah, I've got a capacity for a phone call, but it's only going to be for 20 minutes. And I'd also really like to know what the intention of that phone call is, before I commit to it. So we're setting up what I call a container. Otherwise, I could be on the phone for 4 hours with them just ranting at me about something I've done or sharing something. And if I'm there in that, I'm going to lose my willingness and it might breed resentment. And I'll lose my presence and my focus. So they won't really have the fully present Jem on the phone who's really in and able to witness. They'll have me, drifting off a bit whilst they're ranting and I'm busy making a cup of tea. So before I step into an experience with anyone, I want to know the boundaries of that experience. Yes, I can do this for you. How long would you like this phone call? What's the content of the phone call? I'm like, yeah, sure. I'd like to invite you around for dinner, but I'd like to be starting to close that at 10 o'clock because I really value my bedtime, or even on a date. So, okay, the boundary is 90 minutes and then I'm going to leave, and I'm not going to invite you in for coffee, for example. I like to make those things, and we both split the bill. Let's keep these things really clear, so that there aren't any assumptions, because assumptions are where the gray zone appears and where the body isn't so sure. And that's when we can behave from old patterns or old conditionings and old beliefs that don't necessarily serve us in the moment, So if I've learned that someone's bought me dinner, now I should probably return the favor, then that might be where I'm coming from, instead of let's split the bill. Or he's bought me dinner and I know I don't have to return the favor, and I'm going to be okay with that, and I'm also going to be clear with that. So boundaries show up in all aspects of our life, whether it's work, whether it's relating, dating, sex, intimacy with our children. There's going to be boundaries that mothers need to put down with their kids, fathers need to put down with their kids, or people that we cohabit with. How do we put down boundaries in a way that feels healthy so that it gives us the lines with which to color within, and there's no assumptions made? And then that could also mean that if we all stick to those boundaries and agree them, in theory, we all step into our relationship with willingness, so that we're not going to end up overgiving and in a place of resentment, because the thing we've assumed that will happen hasn't happened. That's how boundaries are helpful for me.
Yes, and for anybody who's self-employed and working in your area like a conscious entrepreneur, kind of those boundaries, like if somebody's late for an appointment, you don't give them extra time, all these, all these kind of things. And this is also when people have these strong boundaries and they can say no, when they say yes, it's because they want to say yes. And so all in all, boundaries create an incredible sense of safety for everyone, isn't it?
I've written a blog on this about what are my boundaries as a practitioner, so people know what to expect when they sign up. You need to be on time. This is the cancellation. This is the situation. And obviously there's obvious boundaries, like, I don't have sex with my clients. People have an idea that might happen. So I make that really clear. I don't have sex with my clients. I don't get naked with my clients. And any touch is one way, touch experience, for example. But there's also other boundaries, like, I hold time boundaries, because if I'm loose on other areas of the boundaries, how do people know that they can trust me when it comes to really holding them in the vulnerable space?
Well, speaking of time, I don't know how well I've failed the boundary this time, because we're coming very close to, and we've still got a long list. Maybe we can have a check in the spring, Jeff, but questions.
There will always be more to talk about, Sven.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure, Jem. Truly, in the true essence of the word, pleasure. It's just always a brilliant experience, and thank you so much. I am going to, in my next talk, I'm going to talk more about my own neurodiversity. That was on the list, but somehow I haven't really come to it in this one. Basically, I'm going to talk about social prescription and nature wellness with with some beautiful people from here in Wales where I live. Matt Lister from Pembrokeshire Outdoor Forum, and Emma Williams and Richard Rees from Celtic Deep. And then I've got Leanne Bird and Sue Christopher as well, who do mindfulness in nature and wild swimming. So that's something we're planning for this autumn. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again, Jem, in the spring. Until then, I'm sure we're going to connect online, but it's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you for coming. Have you got any last words, any kind of last reflections?
Oh, not really, but obviously people can get in touch if they're interested in my work and if they've got questions, and my free gifts page on my website's a good place to start.
Yeah.
There's some interviews, there's some meditations, there's some videos of some practices.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's one thing that I was intending to mention. You got your website, gemairs.co.uk. There's search for the name Jem Ayres on YouTube. There'll be a whole list. Jem Ayres, Spotify. You can get your very beautiful playlists.
I'm all over Google as well, it seems. So Jem
Yeah.
Sex Brighton, because I'm based in Brighton, will get you somewhere.
Definitely also the talks from Sex Chats Brighton, where you speak about full body orgasms, and also, of course, look at the Sex Actually and I Need Sexual Healing clips. Thank you so much, Jem. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sven. This is a beautiful gift to be hosting this podcast for people. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Beautiful. Conversations with Svend, brought to you from a neurodiverse projector viewpoint.